Daily abuse by mother ends when a quiet single dad rescues me. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. The world thought my mother was a saint, but I knew the exact sound her footsteps made when she was coming to hurt me. There is a specific, terrifying cadence to the way Evelyn walks when the cameras are off and the front door is deadbolt. Right now, though, I am not listening to her footsteps. I am listening to the loud, piercing wail of police sirens tearing through our pristine suburban street, and I am staring at the broad, steady back of David, the quiet single dad from next door. He is standing squarely between me and my screaming mother, completely unbothered by the venom she is spitting at him. "You have absolutely no right to be in my home," my mother shrieks, her carefully styled hair falling in messy, uncharacteristic strands across her red face. "She is my daughter. You are trespassing, and I swear to God I will completely ruin you for this." David doesn't flinch. He just keeps his arms slightly raised, creating a solid physical barrier she cannot cross. "The police are pulling up right now, Evelyn," he says, his voice dangerously calm and unwavering. "It is over. You are never touching Emma ever again." I am 18 years old, and for my entire life, I have been a silent prisoner in a museum of horrors. My mother, Evelyn, is the reigning queen of our affluent, picture-perfect neighborhood. She is the PTA president, the head of the neighborhood watch, the woman who organizes the annual charity gala and bakes gourmet cupcakes for every school bake sale. Everyone loves her. Everyone thinks she is an absolute angel who works tirelessly for her community. But I know the dark truth. I know that the immaculate, cold sterility of our house is maintained through absolute psychological terror. I know that behind closed doors, her charming, charismatic smile dissolves into a sneer of pure contempt, and her perfectly manicured hands are used to inflict intense pain that carefully leaves no visible marks for teachers to see. I am so deeply exhausted. I have spent 18 years conditioned to hide my fear, to swallow my tears, and to pretend that my life is as flawless as the manicured lawn in our front yard. I had learned to accept that this was my permanent fate, that no one would ever see past the facade my mother meticulously constructed. I thought I would either die in this house or lose my mind entirely trying to survive it. But getting to this moment of rescue almost cost me everything I had left. The truth was about to tear our entire community apart. Living with Evelyn meant living with two entirely different human beings occupying the exact same body. Public Evelyn was radiant, generous, and endlessly patient. She remembered the names of all the grocery store clerks and donated generously to the local animal shelter. Private Evelyn, however, was a completely different entity. The moment the heavy oak front door clicked shut, the temperature in the house seemed to drop 10 degrees. Her posture would stiffen, her eyes would turn ice cold, and her relentless search for my flaws would begin immediately. I remember a specific Tuesday evening that perfectly captured this agonizing duality. She had just hosted a lavish book club meeting in our pristine living room. For 2 hours, I served iced tea and smiled as the neighborhood women praised my mother's elegance and my supposed good behavior. "You are so incredibly lucky to have Evelyn for a mother, Emma," Mrs. Gable had cooed, patting my hand. I just nodded, feeling violently sick to my stomach. As soon as the last guest drove away, my mother turned to me. The warmth vanished from her face instantly. "You used the wrong coasters for the lemonade," she hissed, her voice a terrifying, quiet rasp. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You stupid, worthless girl." Before I could even stammer out an apology, she grabbed my upper arm. She had a technique. She would pinch the soft flesh on the inside of my arm and twist brutally, leaving deep, painful bruises in places covered by my school uniform sleeves. I gasped in pain but forced myself to stay entirely silent. If I cried, the punishment would last for hours. She shoved me hard against the kitchen island, her eyes completely devoid of any maternal love or human empathy. "Clean this entire kitchen until it shines," she demanded, turning on her heel to walk upstairs. "And do not even think about eating dinner. You don't deserve it." I spent the next 4 hours scrubbing spotless countertops, completely isolated from the outside world, drowning in the suffocating reality of my existence. I was a ghost in my own home, invisible to the neighbors who practically worshipped the woman torturing me. I truly believed I was entirely alone in the universe. I had no idea someone next door was already paying close attention. David moved into the house next door about a year ago, bringing with him his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, and a quiet, unassuming presence. He was a widower, a tall man with tired but kind eyes, who seemed to prefer the messy, vibrant warmth of his overgrown backyard to the sterile perfection of our neighborhood. His yard was filled with colorful plastic toys, a slightly crooked swing set, and the constant, joyful sound of Lily's laughter. It was the exact opposite of our silent, museum-like property. I didn't interact with him much at first. Evelyn despised him, constantly muttering about how his unkempt lawn was driving down our property values. But occasionally, our paths would cross. One humid afternoon, I was tasked with meticulously weeding the flower beds lining the wooden fence that separated our properties. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and my arms were aching from a fresh round of punishments from the night before. I reached for a stubborn dandelion, and my sleeve slipped up just a fraction of an inch, exposing the ugly, dark purple mottling on my inner bicep. At that exact moment, a stray pink plastic ball bounced over the fence and landed squarely in the dirt next to my hand. "Oh, sorry about that," a deep, gentle voice called out. I flinched violently, instinctively pulling my arm back and violently yanking my sleeve down, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked up to see David peering over the fence, a friendly, apologetic smile on his face. "It's okay," I whispered, quickly tossing the ball back over. But as I handed it to him, I fumbled. The plastic ball slipped from my shaking fingers and hit the wooden fence with a loud smack. I instantly cowered, my hands flying up to protect my face. A pure, unfiltered trauma response conditioned by years of living with Evelyn. Silence stretched between us. I slowly lowered my hands, deeply humiliated, expecting to see confusion or judgment on his face. Instead, David wasn't looking at the ball. He wasn't smiling anymore. His expression had shifted into something incredibly sharp, observant, and deeply concerned. He didn't ask me what was wrong. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just looked at me, really looked at me, seeing through the carefully constructed facade that fooled everyone else. His eyes narrowed slightly as he stared directly at my shaking wrist. The terror in our house always escalated over the most trivial, meaningless things. A week after the incident at the fence, my mother reached a terrifying new peak of cruelty. It was a Saturday morning, and I was given a list of 20 exhaustive chores to complete before noon. I worked frantically, terrified of missing a single detail. But in my exhausted state, I made a fatal error. I folded Evelyn's expensive cashmere sweaters and placed them in her drawer, but I accidentally left one of the sleeves slightly tucked under, creating a tiny, almost invisible wrinkle in the fabric. When she inspected my work, the silence in her bedroom was deafening. I stood by the door, trembling. She slowly lifted the sweater, her face a mask of absolute fury. "Is this some kind of sick joke, Emma?" she whispered dangerously. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't see it," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "You did this on purpose. You are trying to ruin the things I love because you are a miserable, pathetic creature," she snarled. She didn't hit me this time. Instead, she methodically walked over to my bedroom across the hall. She grabbed my school backpack, my few cherished books, and the small box of keepsakes I hid under my bed. Without a word, she carried them downstairs and threw them straight into the blazing fireplace we kept running in the winter. I screamed and begged her to stop, falling to my knees on the hardwood floor, but she just watched the flames consume my only safe possessions with a cold, satisfied smirk. "Maybe now you will learn respect," she said, stepping over my sobbing body as if I were garbage. The psychological warfare was entirely breaking me. She locked me in my room with nothing but my mattress for the entire weekend. I lay there in the dark, shivering from the cold air, completely shattered. The pain in my chest was so immense I thought my heart would actually stop beating. I had nothing left. No escape, no future, no hope. I was convinced that Evelyn would eventually kill me, either physically or by eroding my soul, until there was absolutely nothing left to salvage. That was the freezing night I finally gave up all hope. The following Monday, I was outside again, shivering as I scrubbed the patio furniture with freezing water. My eyes were completely swollen shut from crying, and I moved like a mechanical doll. I didn't even notice David standing on his side of the fence until he cleared his throat loudly. I jumped, dropping the wet sponge onto the concrete. "Hey, Emma," he said casually, though his eyes were intensely focused on my bruised, exhausted face. "I'm having a real emergency over here. Lily accidentally pulled up all my tomato plants thinking they were weeds. I have no idea how to replant them so they survive. Could you possibly come over and help me out for an hour?" I froze in absolute panic. I can't. My mother wants me to finish cleaning the patio." Just then, the sliding glass door ripped open and Evelyn stepped out, her public smile immediately plastered on her face upon seeing David. "Good morning, David. How are you?" she chirped, the tone giving me severe whiplash. "Great, Evelyn," David replied smoothly, leaning against the fence. "I was just asking Emma for a huge favor. I am completely hopeless with gardening, and I know your yard is always stunning. Could I borrow her for just an hour to save my vegetable garden?" Evelyn hesitated. Her eyes darted to me, a flash of warning in them, but she was trapped by her own perfect neighbor persona. "Of course, Emma is always happy to help our neighbors," she said sweetly. "Just make sure she is back in exactly an hour." As soon as I crossed through the side gate into David's yard, the atmosphere shifted entirely. It was messy, warm, and smelled like damp earth and freedom. David didn't lead me to a garden. Instead, he led me to a couple of comfortable lawn chairs hidden completely from my mother's view by a large, overgrown oak tree. He handed me a warm mug of hot chocolate and a heavy, fleece blanket. "Sit," he said softly. "You don't have to work. Just rest for a minute." I wrapped my trembling fingers around the warm mug, stunned by the simple, profound kindness of the gesture. For the first time in years, I felt completely safe. We sat in silence for a long time. I sipped the hot chocolate, my eyes darting nervously toward the fence, terrified Evelyn would somehow see through the wood and punish me. David just sat next to me, casually tossing a tennis ball for his golden retriever, creating a sense of total normalcy that I hadn't experienced since I was a little kid. Finally, he stopped throwing the ball and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He didn't look at me directly, which helped ease my racing heart. "Emma," he started, his voice incredibly low and gentle. "I am not going to push you. I am not going to force you to say anything you don't want to say. But I have eyes. I hear the shouting through the walls at night. I see the way you flinch when a door slams, and I saw the bruises on your arm last week." My blood ran completely cold. I gripped the mug so hard my knuckles turned stark white. My entire survival mechanism kicked into high gear. "I don't know what you are talking about," I stammered quickly, my voice trembling uncontrollably. "My mom is great. We argue sometimes. Like normal teenagers. I'm just clumsy. That's where the bruises come from." David slowly turned his head to look at me. There was no pity in his eyes, only a fierce, protective determination. "I used to be a paramedic, Emma. I know the difference between a bruise from falling off a bike and a bruise from a hand gripping too hard. You don't have to protect her. Not here." The urge to collapse into his arms and tell him everything was overwhelming, a physical ache in my throat. But the deeply ingrained terror of Evelyn held me back. If she found out I told someone, she would literally destroy me. "Please," I whispered, tears finally spilling over my eyelashes and tracking down my freezing cheeks. "Please just leave it alone. You don't know what she will do. You have to stop asking." I stood up abruptly, dropping the blanket, desperate to escape back into my familiar prison before I ruined everything. He knew I was lying, and he wasn't backing down. My mother's instincts were terrifyingly sharp. When I returned from David's yard exactly 59 minutes later, she was waiting for me in the kitchen. She didn't say a word at first. She just stared at me, analyzing my face, looking for any sign of betrayal. I tried to keep my expression completely blank, but my eyes were still red from crying in David's yard. "What did you talk about?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Just his garden," I lied, staring at the floor. "He needed help with the soil." Evelyn walked slowly toward me, stopping inches from my face. I could smell her expensive perfume, a scent that always made my stomach churn with anxiety. "You are lying to me," she hissed. "You went over there and whined, didn't you? You tried to make me look bad in front of the neighbors." "No, I swear, Mom, I didn't say anything." I cried out. Before I could blink, her hand shot out, her fingernails digging violently into my shoulder. You are not to speak to him again. Do you understand me? If I catch you even looking at his house, you will regret it for the rest of your miserable life." That evening, the punishment escalated beyond physical pain. While I was scrubbing the bathroom floors, I heard the heavy thud of a hammer. I rushed out to see my mother standing in the hallway, holding a toolbox. My bedroom door had been completely removed from its hinges. "You don't deserve privacy if you can't be trusted," she stated coldly, dragging the heavy wooden door down the hallway and locking it in the basement. The psychological warfare was absolute. I had no sanctuary left. She would walk past my open doorway at all hours of the night, sometimes just standing in the dark hallway, watching me sleep. I was constantly on edge, my nervous system completely frayed. I couldn't change my clothes without fear of her walking in. I couldn't cry without her hearing it. The suffocating feeling of being entirely observed and controlled was driving me to the brink of total insanity. I was completely trapped with nowhere left to hide. 3 agonizing days passed without a door. I avoided the backyard, terrified of accidentally making eye contact with David and triggering Evelyn's wrath. But David was far more observant than my mother gave him credit for. He realized very quickly that my sudden disappearance and the lack of a door upstairs, visible from his second-story window, meant things had escalated dramatically. On the 4th morning, Evelyn left for a PTA meeting. I was tasked with taking out the heavy trash bins. As I dragged the heavy plastic bin down the driveway, I noticed a small, folded piece of yellow notebook paper wedged tightly between the wooden planks of our shared fence, right at my eye level. My heart hammered in my chest. I quickly glanced around to ensure the street was empty, then snatched the paper and shoved it deep into my pocket. I waited until I was hidden in the tiny, windowless laundry room before unfolding it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was neat and blocky. "Emma, I know things are bad. I know she took your door. You are not alone. If you need me, turn the porch light on and off 3 times at midnight. I am writing everything down. Dates, times, the screaming. We are going to get you out of there. Trust me. D." I stared at the note, my breath catching in my throat. He was documenting it. He was actually gathering evidence. The realization that an adult, a real, capable adult, was actively fighting for me sent a shockwave of adrenaline through my exhausted body. He wasn't just offering empty sympathy. He was building a genuine case. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the monster my mother claimed I was. Someone saw the truth, and he was willing to risk his own peaceful life to help me escape my nightmare. I quickly struck a match and burned the note over the utility sink, washing the ashes down the drain. For the first time in my entire life, the suffocating darkness of my reality was pierced by a tiny, brilliant ray of actual hope. The next note he left changed my entire life forever. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday night. Evelyn had been drinking heavy red wine, something she only did when she was exceptionally stressed about her public image. She had lost a minor neighborhood committee vote, and she was furious. She stomped through the house, screaming at me for every perceived slight. The floors were too dirty, my breathing was too loud, my existence was a burden. I was cowering in the corner of the kitchen, trying to make myself as small as possible, when she suddenly snapped entirely. She grabbed a heavy ceramic dinner plate from the counter and hurled it directly at my head. I ducked just in time. The plate smashed against the wall behind me, showering me in sharp, dangerous shards of pottery. A large piece sliced deep into my cheek, and warm blood instantly began pouring down my neck. "Look what you made me do," she screamed, utterly deranged, advancing on me with clenched fists. "You ruined everything." She grabbed me by the hair, violently yanking me upward. I screamed in sheer terror, fighting back for the first time in my life, kicking wildly at her shins. She shoved me backward, and my head slammed hard against the edge of the granite counter. My vision swam, black spots dancing in front of my eyes. I hit the floor hard, dizzy and bleeding profusely. She stood over me, panting, her eyes wild with a violent darkness I had never fully seen before. "Clean up your own blood," she spat, turning and locking herself in her master bedroom. I dragged myself across the floor, my hands shaking violently. I knew with terrifying certainty that if I stayed in this house, she was going to kill me. I managed to pull myself up to the back door. With blood dripping onto my trembling fingers, I reached for the porch light switch. Click on, click off, click on, click off, click on, click off. I slumped against the heavy wooden door, sobbing uncontrollably into my hands, bleeding onto the pristine tile. I prayed he would see the light before she returned. Within exactly 3 minutes, my phone, a cheap, heavily monitored burner Evelyn allowed me for emergencies, vibrated in my pocket. It was an unknown number. I answered it, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the device. "Emma, it's David." The voice was urgent, tight with barely controlled panic. I saw the light. "Are you hurt? Do I need to call an ambulance right now?" She hit me. I sobbed quietly, terrified Evelyn would hear me. "My head is bleeding. David, please, she's going to kill me." "Listen to me very carefully," he commanded, his voice dropping into a professional, steady tone that grounded my spiraling panic. "I am calling your brother, Lucas. I found his contact information online last week. I am going to tell him everything. Then, I am going to the police precinct with my logs and the audio recordings I took from the fence line. I am getting a legal extraction order." I gasped. Lucas. My older brother had run away from home the night he turned 18. He never looked back, leaving me alone with the monster. I resented him for years, but right now, the thought of him knowing the truth was overwhelming. "Will he even care?" I whispered, fresh tears mixing with the blood on my face. "He will care when I tell him what she has done to you," David promised fiercely. "Emma, you have to hold on for just one more day. Pack a small bag. Only the absolute essentials. Hide it well. Tomorrow night, when she is at her charity gala planning meeting, we are pulling you out of that house forever." The line went dead. I sat on the kitchen floor, adrenaline masking the throbbing pain in my head. I quietly cleaned up my own blood, my mind racing with terrifying possibilities. If Evelyn found out I was leaving, the punishment would be unimaginable. I crept up to my doorless room and shoved a pair of jeans, a sweater, and my birth certificate into a small backpack, shoving it deep inside the heating vent. The escape plan was set for the very next night. The next evening was agonizingly slow. Evelyn was in a bizarrely cheerful mood, humming as she touched up her makeup for her charity meeting. I sat on my bed, staring at the wall, my heart beating so loudly I thought she could hear it from the hallway. Just one more hour. One more hour, and David would be waiting with Lucas at the end of the street. "Emma, darling, I need my blue silk scarf," Evelyn called from her bedroom. "It's in the basement laundry pile." I froze. My small, packed backpack was hidden in the heating vent in my room. But earlier, in a moment of panic, I had moved the small stack of David's secret notes from my shoe to the pocket of my winter coat hanging in the basement stairwell. I hurried down the stairs, retrieved the scarf, and turned back. But Evelyn was already standing at the top of the stairs, her cheerful expression entirely gone. She was holding my winter coat. My blood turned to pure ice. She slowly reached into the pocket and pulled out the folded pieces of yellow notebook paper. The silence in the house was absolute, thick and suffocating. I watched in paralyzed horror as she unfolded the top note and read David's messy handwriting. "I am writing everything down. We are going to get you out of there." Her face drained of all color, replacing it with a mask of pure, demonic rage. She looked down at me, standing at the bottom of the stairs. "You," she whispered, her voice shaking with absolute fury. "You little traitor. You told that pathetic loser next door about our family." "Mom, please," I begged, taking a step backward. She descended the stairs with terrifying speed. I turned to run, but she grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking me backward so hard I slammed against the wall. She dragged me by my hair up the stairs and threw me violently onto the hardwood floor of the living room. "You are never leaving this house," she screamed, her public mask entirely obliterated. "I brought you into this world, and I will be the one to take you out of it." Her eyes went totally dark as she locked the door. "Help! Somebody please help me!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, scrambling backward across the living room floor away from my mother. Evelyn stalked toward me, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick from the fireplace mantel. I had never seen her this completely unhinged. She was ready to destroy me rather than let her perfect reputation be ruined. Just as she raised the heavy brass weapon, a massive, terrifying crash echoed through the house. The heavy glass of the back patio door shattered inward with an explosive sound, raining glass shards all over the pristine kitchen tile. Evelyn spun around, screaming in shock, dropping the candlestick. David stepped through the broken frame. He wasn't the quiet, unassuming neighbor anymore. He looked like a force of nature, his face set in a furious, unyielding scowl, a heavy metal flashlight gripped in his hand. He had crossed the property line and violently entered the house uninvited to stop the abuse. "Get away from her right now, Evelyn," David roared, his voice shaking the framed family portraits on the walls. "You broke into my home. You violent psychopath, I'm calling the police." Evelyn shrieked, scrambling for her cell phone on the kitchen island. "I already called them," David said coldly, stepping directly between me and my mother, shielding my trembling body entirely with his own. "They are on their way. And so is Lucas." The mention of my brother's name made Evelyn completely lose her mind. She lunged at David, completely abandoning her pristine, PTA-president persona. She swung wildly, her manicured nails clawing at his face, screaming obscenities that shattered the quiet illusion of our neighborhood. David didn't strike back. He just grabbed her wrists, easily overpowering her and holding her back as she thrashed like a wild animal caught in a trap. "You're done, Evelyn," he repeated loudly over her chaotic screaming. "Your perfect little show is completely over." The sound of breaking glass shattered the neighborhood's quiet illusion. Red and blue lights aggressively flashed through the large front windows, painting the sterile living room walls in frantic, chaotic colors. Two police officers burst through the front door, hands resting cautiously on their holsters. Officer Thorne, a hardened man in his 40s, immediately assessed the chaotic scene. The shattered glass, David holding a thrashing Evelyn, and me, cowering on the floor, my cheeks still bandaged from the plate incident. Instantly, Evelyn burst into dramatic, hysterical tears. "Officers, thank God you are here," she wailed, collapsing onto the sofa and pointing a trembling finger at David. "This man broke into my home. He smashed my window and attacked me. He's been stalking my daughter. Please arrest him." Officer Thorne looked highly skeptical. He turned to David. "Sir, step back immediately." David calmly released Evelyn and raised his hands, stepping away. He didn't look frantic like my mother. He looked entirely prepared. "Officer Thorne," David said clearly, "my name is David Miller. I live next door. I broke the glass to stop an ongoing aggravated assault. I have concrete evidence of long-term domestic abuse." David calmly reached into his back pocket and pulled out a thick, bound notebook and a small digital audio recorder. "I have detailed logs of the screaming, dating back 8 months. I have audio recordings from the property line of her physically threatening the victim. And I have the victim's older brother pulling into the driveway right now to testify to a lifetime of identical abuse." Evelyn's fake tears instantly stopped. She stared at the recorder, absolute terror finally replacing her rage. That's illegal. You can't record me," she stammered, her voice shrill and desperate. Just then, Lucas rushed through the open front door. He looked older, tired, but his eyes locked onto mine with profound, heartbreaking guilt. He turned to the police. "She's a monster," Lucas said, his voice trembling with anger. "She broke my arm when I was 16 and told the hospital I fell down the stairs. I will testify to everything." The silver handcuffs clicked loudly against her perfectly manicured wrists. The walk from our front door to the back of the police cruiser was the longest, most surreal moment of my life. Our quiet, affluent street was lined with practically every neighbor we had. They stood on their manicured lawns in their pajamas, watching in absolute stunned silence as their beloved PTA president, the woman who ran the charity galas and baked the best cupcakes, was aggressively escorted out of her immaculate home in silver handcuffs. Evelyn kept her head down, her carefully styled hair shielding her face, completely humiliated. The flawless facade had cracked, and the monstrous reality underneath was entirely exposed to the world. I stood on the sidewalk, wrapped tightly in David's heavy fleece jacket, shaking violently as the adrenaline finally left my body. Lucas stood next to me, awkwardly wrapping an arm around my shoulders. He was crying silently. "I'm so sorry, Emma," Lucas whispered, his voice cracking with immense guilt. "I should have never left you alone with her. I was just so scared. I'm so sorry." I leaned into my brother, too emotionally exhausted to hold onto my resentment. He was just a terrified kid when he left, just like I was. David walked over after giving his official statement to Officer Thorne. He looked incredibly tired, a nasty scratch bleeding on his cheek from where Evelyn had clawed him. But he offered me a small, genuinely warm smile. "You did it, Emma. You're safe now. It's really over." I was officially removed from the home that night. I didn't take anything but the small backpack from the heating vent. Driving away from that massive, suffocating house, I felt an incredibly complex storm of emotions. I felt immense relief, but also a terrifying, crushing emptiness. The only life I had ever known was completely destroyed, and I had absolutely no idea who I was outside of being Evelyn's victim. Leaving that house was only the beginning of the nightmare. It has been 3 years since the night the glass shattered and my life finally began. Healing is not a straight line. It is a messy, painful, and deeply exhausting process. Evelyn was charged with multiple counts of assault and child endangerment. Stripped of her social standing and facing undeniable evidence, she took a plea deal. She isn't in prison anymore, but she is completely exiled from the community she once ruled. I haven't spoken a single word to her since that night, and I never will again. I live in a small, messy apartment with Lucas now. We have spent hundreds of hours in intense therapy, slowly unlearning the deeply ingrained survival mechanisms Evelyn forced upon us. It took me a full year just to stop flinching every time someone dropped a plate in a restaurant. David and Lily are still a massive part of our lives. We have dinner at his house every single Sunday. He became the father figure I desperately needed, the man who proved that genuine love doesn't require perfection, and it certainly doesn't require silent suffering. To anyone watching this who is trapped behind a perfect suburban facade, terrified that no one will ever believe you, please do not give up hope. Abuse thrives in absolute silence and isolation. The monsters in our lives rely entirely on our fear of exposure to maintain their control. Document everything. Look for the quiet people, the ones who actually pay attention. Family is not always defined by blood. Sometimes, family is just the brave neighbor who is entirely willing to smash through a glass door to pull you out of the darkness. You are not entirely alone. You just have to be brave enough to hold on.